everyone, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. We have our friend today, Will, with us, and we're going to do a show, and we're going to cover some crazy stuff that's going on in the world today. A big announcement, I guess. The tectonic plates of the world economy are shifting as we speak. And I guess it has been announced that we are shifting to blockchain. And that's an interesting idea in seeing through the singularity. I called this the two blockchains. There's a blockchain of being versus a blockchain of becoming. And I think that's the transition we're going through, a changing of an operating platform, replacing some of the tenets of Western civilization and some of the tenets of reality itself. But I want to get things started. I'm going to throw the ball over at Will. One of the other things that we could discuss by way of bringing up the world of paradigms, that's what we're going to talk about, or the mystery of perspective. So before I get Will on, Will reminded me, I guess I've used this before in some of my videos. The old man, is one perspective correct? Is one incorrect? Sometimes our reality is based around these assumptions. Western civilization had some central assumptions of what reality were. This alternative new reality of the circular economy and digital and blockchain is a new fundamental ontological starting point for a new reality. So let's discuss that a little bit, Will, by way of Archbishop Viganò. What do we think about Archbishop Viganò?
So this month, he released a very long statement detailing his perspective of the conflict between Russia and the Ukraine and how it plays into this global fourth industrial revolution and the resetting of the globalist economy. I've read 3/4 of it. I didn't complete it. A lot of links in there. I'd recommend others to read it as well, but it casts some doubt on the legitimacy of Archbishop Viganò's role in this whole revelation of the method, or revelation of how these pieces are coming together to form the new world order. Again, he has this thesis of the children of light versus the children of darkness, and it seems that Archbishop Viganò is too eager to identify these political personalities, i.e., Donald Trump or now Vladimir Putin, as the source of light and the source of the katakon is the term he used, which means the restrainer, which is a biblical typology mentioned in I think the first book of Thessalonians, if I'm not mistaken, by St. Paul. And it's that which holds back the mystery of iniquity and this coming of the age of the Antichrist. So he goes so far as to identify Moscow as a third Rome, which has a lot of people in the traditional Catholic world kind of reeling and confused and questioning, because Russia has traditionally been a Orthodox schismatic church that has broken away from Rome, and he's identifying it as the source of what we'd call the social kingship of Christ in the world. So, Doug, I'm going to hand it back over to you here. What do you? How did you understand that statement?
Well, I could say some reservations I have about Vigano. A lot of this is, again, a problem of perspective, and we could talk about everybody from Archbishop Lefebvre. Is he kind of following in this line where he's tinkering between staying inside of the church or, Sedevacantism? And that was a line that Lefebvre also. So even his place within the church and mentioning a third Rome is kind of almost where Lefebvre was as he was at the ending his career. So yeah, with Vigano, it's interesting as a perspective what he offered about the Ukraine Russian situation. I was troubled initially. I kind of set it to the side. He has served his capacity within the Vatican apparatus was always as a diplomat. So, the fact that he used that as a centerpiece to contact Trump in that matter, again, perspective, like, why are you getting involved in American politics versus, it's very bizarre. He was kind of there in the action in the financial crisis, corruption situation, sex, the Great Reset, and now explaining, I think, the complicated maybe differences between Russia and Ukraine in a way that's, I mean, anything that kind of breaks the censorship bounds right now is kind of helpful. It's on the table. There was one paragraph that was just a little over the top. Now, this is, again, setting aside his association with Steve Bannon and people like this. He plays on this idea of the deep state, and he goes, he was hoping Trump would stay in, and that would be a type of restrainer in the political world, whereas in the Vatican would be a restrainer. The seat of Peter would be this in the religious, in the realm. So he thinks now that deep state is heightened because of Biden, and I just, that's why I started this site how many ever years ago, was just, this is just fallacy thinking, and it's too inside of the dialectic for me at this point. It's too secular, and I think ultimately it's kind of eminentizing the eschaton, and he's much more interested in polemics, I think, than the teleos. But I think we both discussed this. I'm not going to throw him under the bus. I think it was difficult for people to have a perspective on Lefebvre, Archbishop Lefebvre, toward the end of his career. And even in retrospect, people can bring different positions to, was Lefebvre, the beginning of Sedevacantism, or because they're two different worlds and two different perspectives, but seemingly so close together. And, my view on this right now, not to go all over the place, but wherever Vigano might go in the coming weeks or months, if he's going to move more toward this Russian position in Sedevacantism, that means that he is going into interesting territory for sure. And I think, I just don't know if we have the perspective right now to make good sense of it. So I put it in the mystery category right now.
Sure. Yeah, you brought up two terms there, or one term, Sedevacantism, which not everyone. Certainly, I didn't understand until I went down this path. But it is the belief that the seat of the Pope, the chair of Peter, is vacant, meaning that the current Pope is not a valid, legitimate Pope who has the authority to exercise his role as the head of the church. So the church exists in this kind of limbo or confused state because in order for the sacraments to be valid, in order for the appointment of the bishops and the ordination of the bishops to be valid, the Pope has to be a valid, head and authority reigning over the church. So this theory appeared, in the wake of the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, that all the post-conciliar popes have been counterfeits and have been agents of, the global conspiracy. So, you have people like Mel Gibson's dad, and you've mentioned Archbishop Lefebvre, who has kind of a quasi relationship to Sedevacantism. He was actually, a bishop in the during the time of the Second Vatican Council, who protested the changes to the liturgy and the changes to the sacraments and to the major theology of the church. And there's this term that comes up in the way that Vatican II was proposed and implemented called weaponized ambiguity. The murky waters of Vatican II, as Attila Guimarães calls it, where they use the traditional concepts of the church, but they fuse it, or they leave the door open to these liberal interpretations of how the church could perceive itself and could merge with this global philosophy of liberalism. And
it's potentially a new paradigm or a new egregore possibly, but if we ever get there. But yeah.
The universal dignity of man. So Archbishop Lefebvre is an interesting character who started his own society and actually achieved permission from the Vatican. So there's this an issue within these breakaway movements within the Catholic Church to not be schismatic, because once you exit the church hierarchy, then it casts doubt on the legitimacy of your sacraments and your ordination, and where the issue of validity is really at stake here, and that has to do with the way that Christ reigns in the world in a spiritual level and in a political material level. So anyway, I'm still kind of figuring out my own position within my own understanding of Sedevacantism. It's not something that's really hashed out. It's kind of taboo to talk about within traditional Catholic circles, and it's kind of swept under the rug, or you're an outcast if you mention it or bring it up, and that's problematic, because within this cancel culture paradigm that we're in, it's almost gives validity to anything that's unspeakable or unmentionable. So the other kind of perspective within this world is called recognize and resist. So a lot of the big platform personalities on YouTube who are talking about traditional Catholicism take this perspective of we have to still recognize that the popes are legitimate pontiffs within the apostolic succession, connecting back to Peter, but they don't speak and they don't teach and they don't do as a pope should do. So we're to resist their teaching, we're to resist the changes that they want to implement in the church, but we still have to recognize their papal authority, which is equally problematic in my mind to Sedevacantism. And I don't see those two ideas as being mutually exclusive. So I'm trying to figure those things out for myself right now. And how do you what is the proper relationship to the hierarchy? Because hierarchy is a natural innate aspect of reality, and that's something that's being confused, and that's part of the deception and subterfuge of the contemporary world, is a sense of a non-hierarchical, horizontal, egalitarian, ecumenical society in which everyone has equal say and voice. But as you've pointed out over and over again, Doug, that's just a pathway for oligarchy to
Sedevacantism,
control.
It's a lot to unravel. I'll touch on it, and then we can maybe come back to it. But I'm going to be received into the church, in the next couple of weeks. So obviously, I'm going into something where I believe I'm receiving graces from apostolic succession. Yet at the same time, I do see it as kind of a legit position. So I'm working through that. But here's one of the things Will mentioned, how you're kind of traditional recognize and resist tends to be sort of more purple pill. Everything's kind of framed by modernism or liberalism. And they're pretty careful with what they say. And some of them are comfortable going on Fox News or something like this. You're getting into the dark and edgy world, generally speaking, in Sedevacantism, and they'll get more into the deepest part of the intrigue and the deepest part of the deep state and back. So there's a lot of interesting things to investigate there, and I think the movement could be like a canary in the coal mine if the some of the positions, their different positions are that traditionalists or anybody left in the church is a heretic and apostate and probably damned to hell with some of them. So it's an extreme, but yet well argued position. And to me, it sort of reminds me a bit of Calvinism, where this kind of the argument in Calvinism has its own interior logic from the institutes, but the nature of God, that, all like little tortured babies that are for the glory of God, and there's no free will, and it's the relationship is all between God and man is one-sided, and there's the nature of God. And I think Sedevacantism goes to the point where the nature of God is that it's very, 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 very narrow. And so that part's kind of tricky for me. Between like everyone's saved and virtually only the people at my monastery here are saved, it's pretty extreme kind of ends of the spectrum. But I'm I guess, and Will's kind of with me on this, I kind of am more of the paradigm of wheat and tares are existing within it, and there's different thoughts and different beliefs. But at some point, the chair of Peter might be under, I think, a more serious attack than we have right now, of just verbal slippages and things that can be excused away. I think there would be something that would be, despite the great deception, something that would be a little bit more of an indicator that Christ is being fully rejected and replaced by something else. And I just don't think we're there yet. I think the graces are still coming through the sacraments. So I'm just on a kind of a wait and see with Sedevacantism. I'm like that with Vigano right now. Let me introduce quickly in here something, in addition to the blockchain that's coming up. This is stuff out in the public discourse right now. The Carl Schwab, we're aware of him. I guess I had a video once with him in the Jedi gear. And what's his favorite advisor? Yuval Harari, and his book, which is just a book on evolution, essentially. He's saying in this new age, in the new operating platform, in the age of blockchain, we're having new central attention put on assumptions about the making of a new reality. And of course, in the old reality of the high medieval church, reality was created between the transcendent, the God that stands outside of the creation, with creation. And that's how we're locked into a reality of being, because he's perfect being, that being the I am that was revealed by Moses. So that's perfect being, a blockchain of being, and that weds us to reality. And certain assumptions about human beings were fixed. We're going to die. We don't evolve into giraffes or anything else, or unless there's other visions of us being part of it. But our nature is fixed. It's not evolved. It's not a process theology. And it's hierarchical. Our relationship between the kingdom of heaven, or this, city of heaven and the city of earth, is hierarchically arranged, with the kingdom of heaven corresponding to a hierarchy in earth. And tradition weds us back into reality. The sickness for these, if you want to go deep, traditionalists, is a rejection of God, or a rejection of hierarchy, a rejection of our own nature, thinking that we can change human nature. We're locked to it. We're locked to natural law. All these things we're talking about, Will and I, are the metaxy. The metaverse is an inversion of that, and it's a process-orientated thing. And part of this new thing is it Yuri, the advisor, is saying human beings, free will, that's part of the past. We're hackable animals. So the elites can have our code, or whatever we want to call this, or our brains are going to be increasingly given over to this freedom. And this is what Lefebvre would say, Archbishop Lefebvre, liberalism, this just generally is just a prelude to socialism, is a prelude to this new world order, but it's very seductive. Liberalism is predicated upon my desire to define reality. And it's, in short, it's a replacement of personal
what
freedom.
Will and I
are
God.
arguing, we had a little breakaway there. What Will and I are arguing is the one institution on earth that has the hope the mechanisms in place, the power to bring us back and weld us back into this reality is the Roman Catholic Church. Why do you think that the Roman Catholic Church is the last great hope? And before I go on, before I pitch this to Will, to people that aren't Christians, Christianity seems absurd. To Protestants, Catholicism, or knowing what we must know going into it, would seem absurd. Both are absurd. But let me compare this covenant through the physical church. Now, we can argue post-Vatican if there's also a metaphysical church as well, but there's a physical church going on. You take your disputes to the church, a church you can see. So it's fundamental between the relationship between heaven and earth, and God's plan for regeneration of all creation is this physical thing. He uses physical things as part of reclaiming the order of things. But at any rate, let me just say this. In the Old Covenant people, when you think about the disaster, in many ways, it seems to be the Catholic Church, just the miraculousness that it and its doctrines and its functioning capacity are still here. But with the ancient covenant, most of the kings were awful. Most of the people, history will tell us, were indistinguishable from the surrounding peoples. When we arrive at the time that the Word was made flesh, the birth of Christ, Herod, an Edomite, was sitting in kingship position that actually genetically was supposed to be Joseph's. He was probably the most potent heir of David. And instead, he's kind of securing his son for a heavenly kingdom. But Herod, killing all the first babies, and he's not even real. It's just, the first covenant is a very good template. The Catholic history starts to make sense when you look at one covenant and how it's playing out. And I think the current Pope is not Herod. It's not quite that bad yet. But so that's kind of my impression on the sense of iniquity. I can talk a little bit about Guadalupe, but I think Will's also got some ideas about the necessity of the preservation of the hierarchy that perhaps only the Roman Catholic Church, including the mysterious seat of Peter, is a necessary part of restoring order, or even recreating the city of God and the city of man, and the relationship that was actualized in the High Middle Ages, envisioned by St. Augustine and actualized in the High Middle Ages. But go ahead, Will.
The concept of liberty and law is something that you kind of inherit as an American, modern person. It's the sense that the law exists to preserve liberty, and we have this kind of constitutional republic where our rights as citizens are enshrined, and it's all about our rights and what the state owes us to and protects for us. And there's a kind of backdoor paternalism that's opened up in that way, and it's deceptive, it's disingenuous. And this is one of the things that was really revolutionary for me, not revolutionary, but revelatory for me, to understand the significance of the Catholic Church, Christendom, and apostolic succession, and this preservation of the ancient deposit of faith, and this one true church that dates back to the church fathers and to the apostles. And it's a concept of the natural law, which is woven into the fabric of reality. So, the golden rule of Christ, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is something that doesn't need proof or demonstration. It's just immediately evident. And we have the Ten Commandments, do unto others, and then it starts to get tricky and unsettling in a contemporary circumstance when you talk about sexual politics, or the right to unborn life, and these things start to become murky and confusing because we have this preconceived concept of individual personal liberty being the highest form of social reality. That's the summum bonum of social reality is individual personal liberty. And anyway, the church has a different concept of the natural law being governed over by the divine and eternal law. So the moral law precedes the natural law, and insofar as we obey and conform to the natural law, we are participating in the hierarchical kingdom of Christ and the heavenly. So Archbishop Lefebvre in his great book, They Have Uncrowned Him, he speaks about liberty as being the fruit of obedience to the tree of moral and natural law. So rather than liberty being something that exists prior to obedience, it's something that we achieve through our self-discipline and our obedience to things that are eternally true. And so we have this sort of subjectivism and this horizontal thing that we were talking about earlier, that creates this deception about what are the true parameters of reality and what's really right and what's really good. And that's because we are putting liberty and freedom ahead of our obligation to conform to the social kingship of Christ. So in a modern context, transgression from the natural law is mistook for liberty. When we announce our own personal desires that don't hurt anybody else, we don't see the spiritual context in which our disobedience causes a breakdown or a disintegration of the social fabric of reality, and it allows for iniquity to take a greater hold in the world and in society. So I think we're naturally inclined to divine authority and to hierarchy, and that's what kind of is the impetus for this cult of personality and this hero worship that we see in contemporary society. And I think that's kind of a trap that Archbishop Vigano falls into, is wanting to always hitch his wagon to this perceived source of political conservatism and Christian society, when they someone like Putin, who's called for a global economic centralized authority, which presupposing that doesn't already exist, but the externalization of that, and Trump with all of his complicated public relations techniques and campaign. So it brings to mind what the protocols say about when the masses call for a leader, we will provide one. So I think this is a kind of counterfeit, and it's a way of seeing how the mystery of iniquity and this procession toward the Antichrist will take hold, and how the elect will be deceived because they crave this divine leader, this Saul to this philosopher king to lead them out of the darkness. But anyway, I handed it back over to you, Doug.
Okay. Yeah, it's complicated, and I don't know, because part of the Catholic perspective is that man was damaged by the fall, but there's still something God works with. We have an interactive relationship through grace of building something, and nature itself wasn't completely damaged. It's still part of the great plan of reclamation. What I want to let's just flip back here to perspective for a moment. Yes, I think what happened with the Enlightenment is there was a shift, and God was sort of dethroned, and instead of the kingship of Christ being the center of purpose and in society and in culture and what wedded us best to reality, the kingship of Christ was substituted for the sovereignty of the people. And as some hardcore traditionalists will argue, you either have kingship or you have oligarchy. Everything else is just a disguisal mechanism in order to get you to that collectivist dream state of whatever eternal alternative reality you're creating, which is that God can raise, or man can be raised to godhood without the kingship of Christ. So sovereignty of the people, you know, when I teach my courses, there's a big pyramid in the bedrock of everything else, of federalism, of the branches. The deep bedrock is the sovereignty of people. And that's a paradigm that's built on, I think, ultimately unstable. And these were the critiques of this democratic system. I mean, if it were a constitutional republic, that would be one type of bedrock, if you could preserve that. But again, I think the anti-federalists had a great case of saying eventually you're gonna, you know, the sovereignty of the people is sand. And I think we're seeing the fruits of sovereignty of the people play out right now. And we could just throw up our hands and say, put everything up in space and just pray about it, or do our rosaries, but we all have a responsibility. That's what the Medici is about, working with creation, working in the social order to have or maintain a vision. And when we give up on that, we're giving up on that reality. And so, you know, when we go into fear and despair and so forth. And I do think that there could be just a vision, however grand, but of a world, at least some societies, that get back to more of a medieval reality about the relationship of state and church. And that relationship is similar to, you know, being on a ship together. It's the body and soul together. The state has its realm, the church has its realm, but they cooperate. The church tells the shipmaster where to go, what's the destiny, and the state should assist in helping you be there. And different ideas about toleration of different religions, you know, is a topic for a different time. But yeah, having a vision of is also helpful, and kind of having a sense of how to get involved with creation in a helpful way and with society in a way in accordance, I think, with the will of God. And I think a lot of the end time stuff gets us so away from that. We can have an eye on the eschaton, the kingdom of heaven, but part of making that happen is we have responsibilities to the will of God and our place and the station here, working with what he gave us. So I do think that Will and I have talked about this briefly, but I think we're comfortable with something loosely called an integrationist kind of vision, which would be the opposite of a liberal vision. But maybe that should be a topic for another time. I'd like to talk a little bit about Guadalupe, but I want to throw it to you for a moment, Will.
Yeah, I think you touched on quite a few things there, and trying to bring it back to this sense of Vigano, or trying to, you know, troubleshoot or problematize his recent statements and his tendencies toward a political solution to spiritual problems in the world. And, you know, trying to collect the gaze of the faithful and the children of light, as he would say, on you know, a political figure who has complications and constituencies that would make them something a little murkier. And, you know, the possibility that someone can be a double agent or can have multiple motives, or, you know, disguised motives. So, you know, we brought up Archbishop Lefebvre, and there's this other figure that many people have heard of in the conspiracy world, Malachi Martin, it's also pronounced, who was a Jesuit priest and, you know, intellectual who was, you know, a quasi-traditionalist. He was also had an academic career where he, I think, was very important in the translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So he has kind of some inside influence within the Hebraic world. And so he wrote this very famous book called Windswept House, which he called these pieces factions, which were kind of fictional historical fictions that were very close to actual events, but not naming names. And that's one of the things that Archbishop Viganò is always lauded for, is how he's not afraid to name the names of the people involved. But anyway, Malachi Martin the Windswept House, he exposes a satanic mass that took place in the Vatican by proxy with another one that happened in South Carolina, kind of Albert Pike land. And it involved, sexual abuse of a minor and, inverted liturgy, inverted rites. And it was meant to institute the throne of Lucifer in the Vatican. He claims that this really happened, and there's not much evidence out there to contradict him. But later on, he wrote also exposés on the Jesuits, and you've probably, a lot of people have heard of the Jesuit conspiracies, and I'm kind of two minds on that concept. But there's reason to believe that Malachi Martin could have been someone who was a double agent, who was involved in this, who, although he appeared as though he was exposing things that were evil and contrary to the constitution of the church, he was also someone who was an agent to try to bring about the collapse of the church through exposing them. And it's unclear whether or not, Vigano could also be such a figure in which, he's always seems to be in the right place at the right time, with the Vatican Bank scandal, with the Cardinal McCarrick, pedophilia scandal, and then, the Great Reset and the vaccines and all that stuff. He's always seems to be right there in the right time, and with a solution in hand, and that's kind of problematic in and of itself. So, it seems like reality is a little trickier, and the solutions are never quite so material and obvious. And but anyway, you're going to speak on the Virgin of Guadalupe apparition, and we might also get to today the apparition of Fatima, which happened in 1917 in Portugal, and the recent consecration by Pope Francis of the nation of Russia to the Blessed Virgin, which is something that's very hot topic in the Catholic world. But anyway, Doug, I'm interested to see what you have to say about Guadalupe.
Yeah, I'm going to let you do Fatima, and you've been following that a little bit more than I have. But one of the things we're talking about there is a mystery of perspective. And I think a certain kind of mind that steers, believe it or not, toward illness or the rejection of God needs that certainty. And the mystery holds the Bible together, how we can have free will, but yet God can predetermine events in the world or in our lives. And it's a mystery. We don't know the mechanism. And when we suppose we do, we create yet factions upon factions or schisms upon schisms. Anyway, let me try to talk about Guadalupe. This stuff's kind of new to me. But if anybody wants to explore a documentary about Guadalupe, so this is kind of analogous almost to the Shroud of Turin. It's quite amazing. But around the time of the Reformation, when Lutheranism was kind of all of a sudden taking off, and different versions of Calvinism, Christianity wasn't so much being spread throughout the world by Protestantism. That wouldn't really even happen until the 20th century. Some Catholics were becoming Lutheran, or forced to their state change their status, or their prince changed their status, or some states were becoming more Calvinistic. At that same time, on the other side of the world, in one of the most hardened kind of cultures that would probably reject natural law as we kind of envision it, would be the Aztecs. So the church reveals to Juan Pedro this apparition, this vision. Okay, so where I'm going with this vision and what would happen would be so radical that the conversions into the Catholic Church would be en masse, greater than the conversions of Catholics into Lutherans and Catholics into Calvinism over abroad. Just the event was so shocking that millions were baptized within a decade or two. It's just fascinating, the story. And I can ask I basically live in North Mexico here. My students don't know about it. Only like people that want to know about it. You have to go. But here's the story in short. This vision appears 500 years ago to Juan Pedro, and he is an Aztec. And I don't understand how the communication took place, but basically there's a new founded church. He goes because he sees this vision, goes to the church. They don't listen to him. He comes back and he has this great, you've probably seen it before, it's iconic, the Guadalupe picture. And he brings it back, and just immediately they knew this peasant didn't get this from nowhere. So long story short, with the details, it's 500 years. This is on a papyrus that shouldn't have lasted more than 7 years. It's completely intact. It's survived all of the fires and rain and paint, and the image itself can be just broken down. There's no scientific explanation why it exists. It's a cathedral in Mexico City right now. It shouldn't exist. But there's so many fascinating, unexplainable details within the image itself. And I'll just go to one of them. One of them is in, and again, with these apparitions, if William gets to, or Will gets to Fatima, it's the Blessed Mother appearing in many different guises and contexts, and people usually use the name because it kind of explains the context of the situation. Generally, the message is directing her to her son. Sin less, get right with God. Sin less is a pretty simple message in most cases. And then there's some requests in other cases. But in this case, the image of Guadalupe, modern science only recently realized you can look in the eyeball, and it's the image of Juan Pedro. And I mean, it's just fascinating, and so many other things about the layout and that how he could come back with this. It's just excellent. But I just want to one point. I don't know if it still works this way to this day, but early on, indigenous people would literally see the image one way, as like they would see themselves in the image, but Anglos or Spaniards would see the image entirely another way. I mean, it's just supernatural. And and that is part of the mystery of perspective, I think. Again, whether we're talking about Vigano, is he more of a Lefebvre or Martin, Father Martin character? There's a mystery to it. And obviously, part of staying in the medici is realizing that some things, like at a grand level, what's going on in the world today, is Putin in on it? Well, I think there's a good reality that would say, yes, he is. But are these strategic concerns that he has with the aggression of NATO over the last 10 years into his territory really significant? I mean, these are real strategic. This is a real reality that he reacted to a very real strategic imperative. So sometimes I think it's comfortable, or it's good to kind of be able to kind of just have a wait and see with perspectives. Did Will Smith really get smacked? Conspiracy theorists say yes. Normies say, of course not. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, and frankly, I kind of don't care, but it is absurdly sort of related to, I guess, the point of the medici is being able to kind of hold the mystery, walk in faith. Our minds and our flesh really want to be confident sometimes, and to function in the world, we do need a certain sense of confidence. But sometimes things do just happen, right? And sometimes I think people, that's what my point was with biopolitics. We police ourselves, we become agents of the state without ever having signed a contract or knowing that we are, right? We've been biohacked by the old system, through all the other social controls. The new biohacking, I guess, is going to be more direct on our brains and spirits. But I do still think there is a firewall that as long as we're pulling back to reality, that we can resist those controls. I'm going to let you go. It is Juan Pedro, right? Had you ever heard the story, Will?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's been a little while, but I think that sounds like the events. And, I mean, what was happening in the Aztec world, from what I've learned, is human sacrifices on a mass scale, and serpent worship, and you mentioned like total aberration of the natural law, and then this instantaneous conversion of masses of people. And you see today, in the Latin and South American world, enormous faith and devotion to the Blessed Mother. So before I get to Fatima, I want to talk about Quito, Ecuador. Go ahead,
Okay,
Doug.
can I pop in real quick? And
Sure.
again, when you're from a Protestant truther world, when you hear Jesuit, you only think one thing, right? Here comes trouble.
Right.
Or especially modern Jesuits, like Teilhard and his Nunes sphere,
Right.
or, the liberal orders that were participating in Vatican II, or we think of the cryptos that were involved early on. But there's another perspective too, which is to create Christian civilization throughout the world, Latin America, Central America, Asia, India, Catholic civilization, and the reality that we're talking about, and the fixity of our nature, about God standing outside of creation, about the nature of Christ, fully man, fully divine, about the Trinity. This worldview is being cast throughout the world, and a big part of it is Jesuit learning. The Catholic Church, the church militant, is heeding the gospel, and I just don't think there's any appreciation of that really left anymore. Everything is to be discarded. I was going to say by Protestants, but really by everybody. It's just, and that the gospel was being fulfilled by the Jesuits. It's just it's something you kind of have to hang. And part of the role of the church militant was to be, agents and being involved in the Counter-Reformation and whatnot. And I'm not apologizing for everything that the Jesuits do, but it is another part of this perspective. Okay, well, before I let you go, I wanted to squeeze in here a comment again by Klaus Schwab's advisor, Yuval Harari. I'm saying his first name wrong, I suppose, but I did look over a review of the book on evolution and the future of humanity, or we could really call it post-humanity. I don't think there's any kind of humanity inside of this vision that they have, but interesting. It's just right out there, World Economic Forum. It's like the protocols right there. We're going to make sure you've got, how did he say it? We're hooked on the future, quote unquote, useless people will be kept docile with drugs and video games, unquote. I mean, my goodness, talk about just putting the agenda out there. So again, that's preparing us for the metaverse, the new reality, Zombieland. And that is, we're arguing that the opposite threading is the metaxy, and to bring us back and to bind reality into a proper relationship with the order of being. I'm going to let you go, Will.
So inherent in the earlier conversation we were having about Sedevacantism is this issue of validity within the church, validity of rights, validity of authority. In the early 20th century, there was an apparition in Portugal called Our Lady of Fatima, and in which the Blessed Mother appeared to three young shepherd illiterate children and conveyed a series of messages over 6 days in which she appeared. There are three secrets of Fatima, and the first two have been revealed. The third secret has not been fully revealed. The conditions that the apparition of Our Lady set was that the third secret would have to be revealed before 1960, or there would be, a chastisement of the church. So beginning in 1960 was the Second Vatican Council, and the overhaul of the traditional faith. Also, the apparition, the Blessed Mother gave the children a vision of hell, and the children are so horrified that they all went into became nuns, and they were told that everyone needed to pray the rosary, and that the Pope needed to consecrate the nation of Russia to the Sacred Heart of Mary, or the nation of Russia would spread its errors throughout the world. This was in 1917. It was in the midst of World War I. If this consecration were to happen, Our Lady said that the First War would cease and there would not be the Greater War that would come. Obviously, the Greater War came. The consecration was never made validly or fully, which is, all that it takes for a valid consecration is for the Pope to issue a statement in unison with the bishops of the world. So recently, this last week, Pope Francis attempted to perform a valid consecration of Russia, even though this is, way post 1960, post Council, post Cold War. And it brings to mind this issue of validity, and it kind of stirs up the pot of Sedevacantism. Does this Pope have the authority to do so? Is this some sort of subversion or deceptive thing that's actually the opposite of what it proposes to be? So something I'm not sure all the non-Catholic people out there realize is that Pope Francis has this relationship to this Amazonian fertility goddess named Pachamama. And then the representation of Pachamama is almost, comical. It looks like this kind of cartoon Venus of Willendorf, this it looks like something that shouldn't be taken seriously. But Francis has even gone so far, I think, in late 2019, they held a ceremony in which priests and bishops bowed before this pagan idol. And there seems to be this kind of weaponized ambiguity going on, or this dual perspective in which there's a conflation of this Amazonian goddess with the Blessed Mother, who is the mother, the new Eve, the mother of all men, through Christ, right? This conduit, this mediatrix, which we have to the heavenly kingdom. So anyway, that brings to mind with this consecration, and now there's this expectation in sort of the purple pill traditional Catholic world that, okay, the consecration's been made, now we can expect this age of world peace and the reemergence of Catholic authority in the world. And so that's another kind of frame in which to see Vigano's recent message. And it also points back to this former apparition that happened in the 16th century in Ecuador. So, all these things kind of happen in the Latin world, South America, Portugal, Mexico, in which Our Lady of Good Success was the name of that apparition that appeared to a nun in Ecuador, in which she conveyed events that were to take place in the 20th century, in which the stonecutters would mount a conspiracy against the church, in which would lead to a great apostasy. So it seems like Francis is playing a game here where he's trying to straddle two paradigms, two perspectives.
So I think that there's kind of two paradigms that a person can jump on. One would be the post-Vatican, and that's the hermeneutic of continuity. And certainly you can see that, the Catholic Church is done in the vernacular, and the altar was pulled out, and most commonly we put the Eucharist in the hand. But there's still vestiges of the pre-Vatican world, and the apostolic succession is still there. So one can see it, but one can break it apart, as Sedevacantists and traditional Catholics both do. And there was a rupture, and so severe with Vatican II that it became it became a man-centered faith, according to critics of it. And right now, I suppose with these events, it's there if you want to see it, or it's not. And I know nobody likes it as an answer, but I think what's going on now with the reality of Russia, there's who would even know what that would look like. Yes, there does seem to be this charged and weaponized ambiguity that's going on. Is this a consecration of the Pachamama, or is this a dutiful response to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart? I do not know, but I know that the world is spinning. Not even up here in a kind of a visible way. Like I say, I think the fundamental socio-economic order that's always been predicated on high finance and currencies is just shifting in a way that we in international relations used to talk about for forever. The great shift is going on. And so what does this have to do with Pachamama? I think there's a problem of perception. And again, that's a few weeks ago, I happened to catch, or somebody sent it to me, Jordan Peterson talking about the problem of perception and the breaking of Western civilization and how it's fundamentally rooted in these assumptions. He only said 2 paragraphs, but I'm elaborating. But yes, we're having a breakdown of perception. It's the breakdown of Western civilization. It's predicated upon certain assumptions that tie us to this reality. Part of, I think, staying in the medici is being able to, again, just kind of see the 2 different paradigms at work. And as it was with the Guadalupe, maybe one is completely of God and one is of the devil. I suppose that can eventually be the outcome of these things. But sometimes I think 2 paradigms can be somewhat benign, as it was in the case with the Guadalupe, that in order to get to the son through the mother, you see the image in a way that's comfortable for you, but miraculously people from a different ethnicity see it differently. And sometimes I think some of these are sort of harmless differences of simply how we process reality. But I'll kick it back to you. So with what are people going to be looking for? I mean, so it's done. The consecration was made. I mean, I think the world could probably use some divine intervention right now. So that's part of the reason I, would choose to believe that the sacraments are still valid inside the church, because it is the only mechanism honestly left for positive change in terms of bringing us back to reality, because it has a hierarchical structure with apostolic succession, and those seats are mythically or mystically charged in relationship to the kingdom of heaven. And so it's part of this plan of reclamation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the central feature of the plan of reclamation.
But in this mixing of, truth and error, reality and fiction, or there's the potential for a greater deception. Or it's like this, with the appearance of with validity that has been counterfeited, it ratchets up the potential for us to participate in an artificial reality that becomes a parasite. It has to parasite off of the true order and the true hierarchy. So it needs to confuse the poles of the natural and the divine. So
that's what happens during times of shifting, and then this is part of the engineering, I know. Yeah. But sometimes it's safe for us just to kind of stand back and say we're not sure. But right. That is definitely what's going on, is the foisting of an artificial reality.
Right.
But sometimes, with characters like a Vigano, it's just, or I mean, this grander thing of trying to make sense, even outside of the information war about what's going on and in Russia, Ukraine. Sometimes you just have to kind of stand back, just to say it's all fake. Okay, fine. That's good that you don't get sucked in. But again, that's, and I don't want to weaponize the word Gnosticism, but there's 2 frames of this. Everything becomes physical as a type of Gnosticism, that there's only the material, or that everything's in the world of the forms, and we don't really have anything to do here except wait. So we are going to wind these things down, and some of this, with this kind of ambiguity, we don't want to participate in this ambiguity, or certainly any kind of weaponized ambiguity. But looking at a character like a Vigano, on one side, it is kind of downplaying the high, as Will mentioned here, the hierarchy there, the seat of Peter, and kind of casting us toward a Trump or toward a Putin and these kind of personalities. That's dangerous. That could lead to immanentizing the eschaton, a sickness unto death, and ultimately actually bring about the end of Western civilization. But on the other hand, he has the source there to perhaps lead us back into a true, deep, traditional direction, or he might even have within him that vision. However awkward he might have sometimes come off in terms of his relationship to what he perceives to be the deep church and the deep state, which I think is somewhat problematic. But if we are in this sort of end time, and the restrainer, which is I think that is a classical reading of scripture, that the chair of Peter is the restrainer, perhaps along with, Saint Michael. That, or the archangel Michael rather, that is the restrainer. And then if that's completely, he said, he used the word desolate, which is kind of that Sedevacantism kind of language, like vacant. So he's bringing us into a new kind of dangerous perhaps territory. But I mean, if this is the time of the Antichrist, we're also preparing ourselves. So the jury is still out on Vigano, whether prophet or kind of a dangerous territory to go into. There is just nothing like this on the world stage, and to have the position that he does is quite remarkable. And what he said about the reset, and there are connections to the reset that he makes that are going on in Ukraine, but yet at the same time, I've committed myself to illuminating the true deep state and the size of it, the scope of it. But I don't know everything. I don't know if there are some competing oligarchical factions that are going on, or the octopus is slapping its arms in certain places and elements of competition are really going on and real. I simply don't know. And I think it's dangerous to know. With new information and new thoughts, I'm willing to kind of adjust what I'm thinking about our transition into the new world order, and what we do about it. But I want you to finish with an idea you mentioned. What we're really doing here is saying that we don't want to materialize everything and just put our, that the eschaton has to be realized entirely here on earth. That's dominionism, or even Christian reconstructionism, or millennialism. And those are all danger territories. But we don't want to overly spiritualize our location here. And you said it well. Again, that was a great book, Lefebvre's book on liberalism. But Lefebvre says, yeah, we have to get in the danger of liberalism. Ultimately, freedom replaces God and our defining of our reality. And we have to return to the perspective or the lenses that we had in order to grasp reality. And those happen to be attached to the Catholic roots of Western civilization. I'm going to let you finish today, Will, and I think we're going to do another part. And Will wanted to tie together again some more ideas, Pachamama, Our Lady of Good Success, and so forth. But what did you think? You put it one way a moment ago about our obligation here as citizens of this kingdom that have to be in two worlds, a temporal and a heavenly kingdom. But we do have responsibilities here, and we can't spiritualize them, right, Will?
Right. Yeah. That's I think the essence of the medicacy for me is, like you were saying earlier, there's a tendency to just say, well, I'm not going to get wrapped up in this Russian-Ukrainian conflict, or any of these other political controversies, because they're all fake. And I think there is some wisdom to that, but we have this mandate and obligation to enact in the material, physical, moral, social, and political spheres the divine kingship of Christ, and make our actions and our attitudes and views reflect those in the physical world, so as to unite, in body and spirit, the heavenly and the earthly. And so, there's a gap between these two spheres of reality, but that gap is where, reality is forged, and how objective truth and reality is imbued into the world that we inhabit.
So we're going to check out for today. Thank you for joining us, everybody. This has been Will and Doug. And we plan on making a video pretty soon and tying a couple things together, and everything from Pachamama to Russia to the blockchain. So thanks everybody. This has been Dr. Deep State and Will, and we will see you later. Hope everybody's having a great day and a great week. To y'all, God bless.